So if you remember, and this was beautiful presentation, Michael, of yours on podocyte folding glomerulopathy, and I'm pleased to have the guru in the audience, because I did present the case of podocyte folding glomerulopathy in Sydney, which, by the way, I spelled wrongly. It's S-I, I did, because it's kidney, Sydney, so I didn't change it to a Y. So let's see if I can figure this out. So the patient was started out in 2009. She was a 51-year-old female with an initial presentation of subnephrotic range proteinuria, normotensis, and there were more clinical that I had originally, but I didn't add them because otherwise it would be too long. Anyway, so the patient had the first biopsy, and there was really not much to see in the first biopsy. The glomeruli looked quite fine. There was one glomerulus, not depicted here, that had a little bit of a halinosis at the hilum, so it was suggested that this may be an early FSGS case. But there were no other findings. There was a little bit of a trace IgG in the GBM, and that comes back to what you were saying, Michael, of trace IgG can be anything, and people call it MGN, but they didn't. Anyway, the podocytes did show changes, and you can see here. It's interesting that I don't see the arrow there. I see the arrow here. Okay, so the podocyte was completely effaced, not globally. I mean, there is some food processes in stain, but complete effacement. And there was also this indentation of the podocyte within the basal membrane, and some indentations more there. So it looked really funny. At that time, it was just called possibly FSGS, like the patient was treated with prednisone, and she actually resolved. And 3 years later, she presented again with relapsing proteinuria. And at this point, we have a second biopsy that again doesn't show much by light microscopy. And there was again one glomerulus that showed some beginning perihilar sclerosis. And it showed craters. And here we have in the electron microscopy, you see again the same changes in the basal membrane with these indentations and abnormalities really of the basal membrane. Also, the podocyte is very swollen. It has microvillus transformation. And more pictures of the podocyte. You can see how the podocyte is really very heavy and falling into the basal membrane. And there were no real deposits here, but there were these little inclusions of debris or electron densities, osmophilic inclusions, or cell particles that were a little bit unexplained. And I think that these were the very early changes that were described really with podocyte folding glomerulopathy. There were also some areas that had more lucency and could represent parts of resorbed deposits, but it was a bit difficult. So the IgG was still there. It was a little bit brighter, but not quite bright. And so it was suggested that this was an evolving or resolving MGN. PLA2R was negative. And the patient, in addition, was also on mesalamine for inflammatory bowel disease, and she had also, I don't know whether she had the uveitis secondary to the mesalamine, because mesalamine can cause that, or that it was all part of an autoimmune disease, that autoimmune diseases that can give you uveitis and secondary MGN. So that was the idea at that time. And so I don't recall how they treated her, but the patient, was fine. And so it was a remission, but 3 years later, again, presents with relapsing nephrotic syndrome. And also at this point, also acute tubular injury. There was not quite a progression of tubular interstitial disease, but there was some tubular injury and, effacement of the simplification of the tubular epithelium and so. And again, the glomeruli didn't show a lot, right? There were some adhesions here to Bowman's capsule, and that Jones stain I'll show now, twice. But you can see here that there are all these craters, and this is the longitudinal section of the crater, but it could have also been the podocyte. So it was a little bit, very suggestive of MGN. But at this point, it didn't fit quite. The whole thing didn't fit quite. So the podocytes, again, or the basal membranes were very disrupted, very irregular, thickened, and the podocytes were effaced, microbial transformation, all these indentations and all these indentations here of the cytoplasm. So, it really was very suggestive of something, but not quite diagnostic. And again, here the same thing. Here, what Michael showed in his fantastic presentation was actually those microspherules. And at that time, I thought that some of these may be some microspherules. And I was trying to push the diagnosis, right? But don't do it if you don't have to. So here again, these indentations of the podocyte. And here you see a little microspherule there. Very rare, but again, distorted, the membrane. So more of the same. So you can see the membrane is completely irregular, corrugated, and distorted. And then you can see in some areas, how do I go back? But I won't, can go back here. So you can see these very corrugated basal membranes, but the podocyte looks as if it's trying to go through and through here. So that was very interesting. So at this point, I discussed this with the clinician, and when I have a renal biopsy and there is a prior, I always pull it. And if there are multiple priors, I always pull everything. So just to get a sense of the evolution of disease. So the biopsies of 2009, 2012, and 2015 were sent off for expert consultation, and this is what we got back. So the three biopsies demonstrate an unusual glomerulopathy, where the immune deposits are small and sparse and are closely associated with the podocyte invaginations, and that the pattern is most compatible with a chronic immune complex glomerulonephritis and may represent an atypical form of membranous, likely secondary, and that was already proposed by us in 2012. And then there was this third line of podocyte-enfolding glomerulopathy has been described, with these biopsies showing some but not all features described in the entity. So at this point, this is what the diagnosis is for the clinician. So I let them know that that is what the expert opinion was. And, the patient is treated at that point with rituximab. And rituximab has been used for a long time in, minimal change disease and in, obviously, started with lymphoma, but in the renal setting in the early 2000s was already introduced for MCD and for, ANCA-mediated vasculitis and for membranous. So the patient did really well here. She had recurrent nephrotic syndrome and the fourth renal biopsy. Actually, no, I am wrong. She had rituximab after this one, not after the 2015 one. So anyway, now the biopsy really shows a lot of chronic disease in the tubular interstitial compartment, and also very obvious segmental sclerosis and thickening of Bowman's capsule and things like that. And again, the Jones stain showed multiple craters all over the place, but no double contours and no spikes. So at this point, the EM is they're practically, getting worse, but still the same in terms of glomerular basal membrane thickening, irregularities, some areas are thinning. There was this very, grayish expansion of the subendothelial space, whether this was really expansion or the lamina propria itself, I don't know. But this here were, again, all these little granularities that you saw that could have been microspherules or not. Podocyte, very, very effaced. So this is where we were, and so at this point, I'm looking at the papers and I'm looking at this entity, podocytic folding glomerulopathy, and I think, maybe I can stick that diagnosis on it, And so that's probably what we did. Again, the same changes that you saw. Here also you had some paramesangial electron lucency, and so I thought maybe these are resorbed deposits, so the idea of, like a secondary MGN was still there. But in any case, and then here in the subendothelial space, you had these spherules, the tiny spherules here. And so that looked very suggestive of the entity. So if we recapitulate all, right? So there is, if you look particularly at the electron microscopy, there is significant evolution of disease ultrastructurally within the glomerular basal membrane, with a lot of alterations that are both structural and disruptive. A lot of thinning as well, thin and thick areas. And so this was very, very interesting. So diagnosis at this point, the patient at this point was put on rituximab and she did really well. So a review of all the renal biopsies since 2009 reveals an evolving presentation of a diffuse podocytopathy classified as podocyte-folding glomerulopathy at that time. So I presented this to in Sydney. And what do we have? So the patient, this evolution, and if you look at the advancements in medicine and in science and in molecular studies, it is very interesting to see that there is evolution of entities. Entities come on board, and then they get confused with everything else. And then more entities has come. And the typical example of this is MFH. Do we remember that MFH? Malignant fibrocystosarcoma that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, it's now divided in all different categories of soft tissue tumors. But again here, so there's this evolution. So Dr. Howe, I think go and sit, and Dr. Howe says, you should call Dr. Waynes and at the Brigham and see if she can do the antinephrin. So I was interested. I didn't think about that. Anyway. So I did that. So I sent to Dr. Waynes the biopsy of 2019 only at this point. And 2019 biopsy, and these are the images that she sent me back. And by the way, Astrid Baines also gave a fantastic presentation in Sydney. And I don't remember what did she talk about the antinephrin there? Yeah, she talked about antinephrin. And so, when I spoke with her, she said, Joanna, you did a great presentation on, review of the literature and everything, but I don't think that your case is, So yeah, that's why I'm calling you, because I want to send you material to do this thing. And so this is the beautiful punctate IgG that you can see in the peripheral basal membrane. and on confocal microscopy. And here is the napsin, not the napsin, I mean the nephrine, the antinephrine that she's done on the peripheral basal membrane. Very beautiful examples of this positivity. And when you overlap these images, you see fantastic colocalization of IgG with nephrine. And that would be the yellow dots. So the yellow dots are all these nephrine antibodies that are colocalized. So a beautiful case, right? So at this point, I call my clinician and tell her, you wanted to write a paper on how rituximab was working so well in podocytic follicular glomerulopathy. I don't think we can write it because this is not that. But, we can write something else about the case. And so just very briefly, this is not, I'm not going through everything, but very briefly, nephrine was, this is Dr. Vane's big collaboration throughout, but the discovery of this autoantibody targeting nephrine in minimal change disease. And actually, and this is in human, actually antinephrine was already, or antibodies to nephrine were already tested years before, but in mouse models with in mouse models. And so, this is all the evolution of how we learn from the animal experimental models, and how we can bring that then to the clinics or to humans, and then to the clinics, and identify new entities. So this is really what we have for this case. And now in her paper, very briefly, she evaluated antinephrine in the serum and saw that in normal healthy individuals, you don't have anything, very low levels, and also in PLA2R positive MGN. But in minimal change disease, in patients with minimal change disease, there was a very high level of antinephrine in the serum. And that wasn't particularly seen, you could see very nicely that the patients that had remission were in remission, did not have this spike in nephrine, but they would have it if they had active disease. So, this is all about the circulating antibodies. We have thought for many years that the, MCD was there was no reason why people were getting MCD. What was the etiology? And we always also for FSGS, we speculated about the circulating antibody, and this is it practically. So this is very nice. And these are all images of a paper that show colocalization again. So these are the patients that are IgG positive, and the IgG colocalizes with the nephrine in these two patients. But if they are IgG negative, a nephrine does not localize. So, and then as a control, she had this naptopody. So, and there's more of the same beautiful. This was a super resolution structured illumination microscopy, which is different. So what do we have? Since that paper in 2022 from Dr. Vanes, there have been quite a lot of papers out there from almost all over the world, has been working and looking at cohorts of patients with MCD and FSGS and trying to figure out if this is really something. And I think that this is actually something. So as far as we know now, we have, these antinephrine autoantibodies that are a key pathogenic factor in a significant subset of primary podocytopathies, particularly MCD and FSGS. So when we look at the evolution of this patient, then we see that now we have an additional entity, yeah? So here, and I think that for this particular patient, it stops here. This is quite diagnostic. So what else do I have? So what I did then, I asked Dr. Vanes if collegially she could review all the biopsies. And she said, yeah, she would do so. And so she did. And this is what she had thought about it. Slowly progressive and likely autoimmune-mediated podocytopathy in various stages of activity and recovery with unequivocal tissue evidence of anti-nephrine antibodies. And then she also commented on the structural abnormalities of the GBM that could be genetically mediated. So, all of this, I was always once I touched base with Dr. Vanes, I was in contact with a nephrologist. I was really telling them, it would be great to have this patient, but the patient was lost to follow-up. I don't know if the patient moved or what happened with her, but she was in remission on rituximab, and that was really very interesting to see. And, again, proving that this is circulating something, an antibody going on. So, and then for biggest is, and I see that my slide is blank, was not supposed to be blank. But anyway, I want to thank the entire community of the Society for Ultrastructural Pathology, because I've been growing really a lot, being part of the society since 2008. And I particularly want to thank Dr. Howell that actually whispered to me, maybe you should do the anti-nephrine on this patient. So I'm very grateful for that. And then last but not least, this is a great meeting, and I missed part of it this morning, but I want to thank the Herreras, fantastic, and very well organized, and we're looking forward to spending some time together at your beautiful house. Yeah, and so that's it for the evening.